guest, but unfortunately haven't been able to for a while. Hi everyone, welcome to another session. And I decided to call this Code with Ehoneah Obed. And as some of you may know, I am very much interested in teaching or learning by teaching. And most of the time, I feel that it is the best way that I learn things. But then again, I realized doing my reflections for the end of this year, I realized that in 2022, I was able to learn a lot because almost every single day I was supposed to show up and teach. So I figured that one of the best way for me to really learn a lot this year as well would be to show up and teach. And once I know that I'm coming to teach, I know I have to put in a lot of work. So I'm not complacent about it because I don't want to come and disappoint anybody. I know a lot of you come with high expectations of my teachings, and I want to always meet or better still exceed those expectations of yours. So I'm glad that we get together today to start another stream. Hopefully, this is just the beginning. We're going to learn a lot more technologies. So, as I listed in the post that I used to announce this stream, there are a lot of technologies that almost every one of us wants to learn, right? So hopefully this is just the beginning of us trying to learn all of those technologies. And all right. So first things first, we are going to be learning Django, and that's more of an introduction to Django. And at the end of the day, you'd have to start from the very beginning for everybody to appreciate it. I know some of you are here, you've already delved into it and all. And the disclaimer that I'll give is that I'm not an expert in Django. I'm actually learning Django. And just as I did when I was doing the ALS program, I learned stuff, understand it from the beginner's perspective, and try to teach it. So I'm going to do my best to teach it as such. I'm happy to take a discussion from the floor. If you learned anything new from anywhere and you want to add on, it is an open discussion session. I think the ground rule that I would like to set based on the experience with the past PLDs I've held is that if I am in the process of explaining something and you have a question, please do not call me when I'm in a process, right? As soon as I'm done, you can throw in your question, raise your hand. That's why now I'm happy we are using Zoom. You can drop it in the chats. I think I enabled Q&A as well. You can drop all relevant questions in the Q&A if you feel like typing. Otherwise, raise your hand. I pause and I call you so that we don't have that distraction, because sometimes if you distract me when I'm saying something, I may end up forgetting exactly what I wanted to say. So, how excited are you about today's stream? I'm looking for the outline I made for this class. Oh my goodness. How excited are you about this stream? Let me hear from at least 2 or 3 people before we get started. 2 or 3 people, anyone?
Yeah, I'm so excited. It's Erasmus.
Erasmus, hi.
Yes.
Oh, you
Hi.
used Django for your project, right?
Yeah, this
I
project. Yes,
remember.
please.
Great, great, great. All right.
Yeah.
That
Although
is,
I have a little bit of knowledge, but then I would like to also learn from your perspective
mm, yeah,
to
that's
get
fine.
more understanding things. So yeah, I'm happy.
Great, great, great. At the end of the day, that's what it is, right? We are all going to be learning together. That's how I see it, just as we used to do as PLDs in ALS. And I'm using the past tense because I'm no longer a student, right, in ALS. And that's why I also do not want to call it PLD, because not everybody outside there is conversant with the word or even has knowledge of the term that we are used to called PLDs. So I'll say this is just a coding session, code with Ehoneah Obed, and we are all going to learn together. If you have any experience with something, please feel free to ask. The one thing that I wouldn't probably tolerate is when you have like knowledge of something and you are trying to show off by intimidating the rest of us, right? I know there are times that people want to behave like that. They want to show everybody that they know. See, the only way when I show up like this, and even on any platform at all, one of the best things I do is to lay low and pretend as if I know nothing. Because one important thing I've learned is that if a cup is full, you can't add anything to it. You always have to empty the cup in order to add more. So if you really want to learn something extra, don't come in feeling full that, oh, I already know this, right? Come in with that humbleness of, okay, we're going to learn. Even if I know it, maybe he's going to say it in a different way, or hey, feel free to share it with everyone, but in a tone that is acceptable to everyone, makes everybody willing to learn. All right. Let me listen to one last person. We get started. I'll try and be reading. Oh, YouTube link. Okay, okay. So, Wandeli, thank you for grabbing that for us. Yeah, George, please go ahead.
So I'm also excited to be on this call because I used to use Flask, so I've been wanting to learn how to use Django, and the call just came almost the perfect time. I
Mm,
can call it the perfect time because I wanted to start learning Django while I saw the post on Twitter yesterday that there will be a Django learning session today. I was so
okay.
excited about it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And thank you also. I hope that with that same excitement, you get to learn a lot more from these sessions. Session started. So yeah, those of you who are in other groups, if you care, you can invite anyone who may be interested to be here. I wish I could post to the Telegram group. Anyone in the iCreate community Telegram group, help me post something in there because I've forgotten about it. Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's get started. I hope you all can see my screen, and I hope Zoom is able to record as well. Let's start from, so pardon me if you see me look at this direction. I have two screens, that's why I've turned to, oh, it's Django. Django. All right, let's get started with it. So the very first thing that we need to understand is what is Django. And if you take Django and you want to understand the very, I think the best thing that you need to appreciate is that Django is a web framework. Then we now get into what is a web framework, which is very important. And once again, if you have any question, you can always drop it in the Q&A session, or you raise your hand. I would call you, then you ask your question. Feel free to ask questions. The end goal is not for me to come and do a YouTube video recording. The end goal is for those of you who are present in the live audience to get like the best. It's not for you to finish and say, I'm going to watch recording. No, I mean, I'm happy if you go and watch the recording, but the reason I didn't pre-record this and publish to YouTube is for you to be part. So find it as this is a discussion, be able to ask all your questions. So the very first thing, as I said, is to understand what a web framework is. And this is where I think I would want to spend some time to explain what a web framework is so that we don't just jump blindly into Django. My first encounter with a web framework was probably, I don't know which year, but if my memory serves me right, that would be when I was in probably fourth year, third year to fourth year in the university, when a friend of mine were discussing. Those times I was learning PHP. We're discussing creating a platform. He had created a social media platform, but then he had to write a lot of code. So we're discussing some of these things. And that is when he introduced me to the concept of web frameworks. But we were so scared about learning a new framework because we didn't have a solid background in the programming language that we were doing. So what we decided was that, okay, instead of learning a new framework, we're going to use PHP to build our own small framework that we are going to be using. Huh. So what is a framework in this case? If in English, if you say a framework, essentially it is something that has been made available that you can leverage to build other things, right? So if I tell you that my framework for thinking is this, I give you the steps that I follow to think so that you can now adopt that framework for your own thought process as well. Like, what is the framework that you've been using to tackle your ALS tasks for those of you who are in ALX? And I know I get this question a lot of times. How were you going about your ALS project? So maybe there is a structured approach that I came up with that I use. So for instance, I could say, and this is just an example, I could say that, oh, my framework for working on ALS project was one, when the project begins, I start off by gathering all the resources that I need for this particular project. I take my time to go through the resources and summarize the things. This is not to say that's what I was doing. I'm just giving you an example. But then I'm giving you a structured approach to tackling a particular thing, which in our case is the ALS project. So a framework essentially is just that structure that enables you to solve a particular problem or do a particular thing in a specific way. So web frameworks in themselves are just a bunch of code that people have written. See, if you want to write your own application completely, there are a lot of things that you have to take into consideration, a lot of things that you have to build into it. How will your application interact with databases? How are you going to authenticate users? How are you going to ensure that your application is very fast and not slow? How are you going to ensure that when a visitor or a user enters a particular URL, your application knows which page to show the person? So you have to handle all of these. And you realize that every website or web application that you are going to create, these are common things that you are going to do for every one of them. So there is some sort of repetition. And as they say, programmers, we are very lazy. So we don't want to do things. I know the last time I was building this web app, I wrote all of this basic code that enabled me to connect to the database, that enabled me to do user authentication, that enabled me to route the user based on the URL that they have entered. Today, I'm supposed to build another application. I'm going to do the same thing all over again. Does it make sense to keep doing the same thing all over again? If it is the same thing, why can't we just abstract that base code so that anytime I'm about to create a new project, I just go and take that base code, since it is the same thing that I'm going to be implementing, and use it again. So I don't have to write that code over and over again. So that is essentially what a web framework is. For the various websites and web applications that we have been developing, all of these important things that are common amongst them, some team or somebody decided to put all of these things together into a framework that is a particular structure that we can just adopt and say, okay, for my next project, I want to use this structure that this person has provided so that I don't have to go and write all the code. How my app is going to interact with the database, is going to do user authentication, is going to do all of this. I don't have to write everything from scratch. Somebody has done that dirty work for me. It's a lot of work. And remember that even the very popular frameworks, web frameworks that we've been using, have been iteratively improved over time, several years. And even till now, there are still problems with it. So imagine if you have to write your own from scratch. I mean, I have been in that shoes before, and I know that it's not funny. And by the time you realize, you spend all the time just building that foundation. That is all that you've done. You spend all the time building a foundation for the project that you are yet to do. So imagine I give you a project, build me a web app that's, I mean, whatever functionality. But the question is, build me a web app. And it takes you, say, 2 months to build the foundation of the web app. You are now setting up the directories that are going to use, ensuring that you have every directory in the right position. You are now doing, how am I going to interact with database in an event where this person doesn't want me to use a relational database? Can I easily switch? Or in events where we now, after 3 months of using the application, we think that no, a relational database isn't the best for this project, can I just switch to this? It will take you several months to build just the foundation before you start even thinking about the application itself and its functionalities. That is what you find yourself doing in the absence of Django. Let me give you a real life analogy. If let's talk about cooking, and I want to believe everybody is familiar with cooking. If you are asked to cook a meal, say I've asked you to, you are in the wilderness right now, and I've asked you to cook rice. What will you need to cook rice in the wilderness? Somebody should tell me. I want to hear. Those of you who are cooks, any cook or chef, cookathon people, where are you? Yes, any cook or chef around to tell us. You are in the wilderness. You want to cook rice. What and what do you need? Please unmute yourself and let's have that discussion. It's important. Yes, yes. Nobody knows how to cook in this class. Oh, really? Or you guys cannot unmute? Hello, hello, hello. Let me start calling names.
Yeah,
Hello, Joseph.
hello, Doc.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'll have to first of all get rice
Mm-hmm.
and a quantity of rice, and
Mm-hmm.
then I also have to get an amount of like or like oil. I have
Mm.
to get oil,
Yeah.
water, salt. Yeah, I think I'm
And
good to go.
and do you know how difficult that is going to be to get in the wilderness? But imagine anywhere at all that you find yourself, if you are hungry and you need to prepare food, right? You need to get all of these things. See, for every food that you are going to cook, there has to be a source of heat. True or false? You need a source of heat to be able to cook, right? That means that every time somebody is going to cook, and we cook almost every single day. So imagine if you didn't have a constant supply of heat in your kitchen, or you don't even have a kitchen. So every single day that you have to, like, that's how life in the wilderness used to be like. Every single day that you needed to cook, you have to now go out there and source for firewood. Go and gather firewood, then gather stones that you are going to splash against each other to get some fire and all of that. But now we thought about it that anytime I want to cook, these are things I need. I need utensils, I need water, I need everything that I needed. They have come together to think about it and say, okay, let's build a particular building in the house known as a kitchen, and make provisions that are needed to cook food, so that whenever you need to cook, you don't have to now go and struggle and gather all of these things. They are there for you. All you need is to come, know your recipe, and put them together the way you want, and you have your food. It is the same thing that our web framework is, because we all need to build a web app, but then there are those basic things that we need. We need a source of fire, or heat. We need some water. We need ingredients. We need all of these things that you need to cook. All of these things that you need to build a web app. The basic requirement of every web app, somebody has put it together to form the web framework. But then this has been done in various programming languages. So if you take a programming language like PHP, which was my first major programming language that I learned, PHP has some web frameworks. Oh no, where are you? What's that? Stop this. I hope. Okay. Is it the same thing? No. I think it's here. Okay. I get rid of it. Great. I hope it's gone now. So I was talking about PHP. When I decided to learn PHP, a web framework in PHP, the first one I learned was called Code Igniter. So the programmers or people who write code in PHP thought of it that if I want to build a web application using PHP, I need some basic things. Okay, so let's use PHP to create that basic layer, that foundation that people can build on top of it. And they build one called Code Igniter. Another one that I've learned before is called Laravel. So that is also another one. These two things introduced me to web framework apart from trying to build my own. Then Django is the Python version, like a web framework built with Python. And those of you who have been in ALS for a while, you probably would have done Flask already, which is also another web framework for Python. So almost every programming language that you take, there is a web framework for it. If you take a language like JavaScript, you can talk about Vue.js, you can talk about AngularJS, Nest.js, like all of these are frameworks. Essentially, all that this means, if you don't understand anything I've said so far, all that this means is just there is code that somebody has written that you are just going to copy and now build on top of it. So they have not built the application for you, but they've done the structure, the foundation that you need in order to build a working application. So now you have to use your knowledge and expertise of how these things work to build your own application. But one thing about web framework is that a lot of them are highly opinionated. That means that they tell you exactly what to do. You have to follow the instruction. It's like the recipe that you are going to use to prepare the food. If you deviate from the recipe, you are not going to end up getting the right food that you want. So the chef told you that this is how to prepare this food. If you deviate from that recipe, you're not going to end up with the right kind of food. So that is what web frameworks are. The boilerplate code that people have written, you can just go and copy and paste it in your application and now start building your own app. They will now tell you that, okay, so we have already written the foundation for you. We've written this base code for you. And this code tells you that if you want to connect to a database, you need to do this. If you want to authenticate a user, you need to do this. So for you, learning a web framework essentially involves you trying to know for this particular framework, how do I connect to a database? How do I authenticate a user? How do I route a user based on the URL that they have entered in the browser? That is all that you are learning. So if we take Django, which is of interest to us right now, our goal here is, okay, what does Django entail? What at all is within Django such that after I've installed Django, where do I go to? How do I create my databases? How do I create users? How do I authenticate users and all of that? Right. So that is essentially what a web framework is. Now let me take says a question. Okay. So that leaves with a question. Do you have to spend much time learning frameworks or mastering the basis of the native language of that framework? No, at the end of the day, before you choose a framework to work with, you have to know the language that was used in building the framework. That's very important. I wouldn't advise that you jump into a framework without really understanding the language. So what helped me when I was trying to learn these two frameworks was the fact that I had tried building a framework with PHP. So now I could even understand how these are built, like the web framework itself. How is it built? What is behind the scene for it? I can see exactly what is there and not just use it. I understand everything, but hey, this is several years ago, and those times I didn't understand programming like I do now. I so wish that I can go back to it, and hopefully, as we are learning, I probably will go back to it, and we'll all learn all of these things together. Maybe go to the extent of even digging into the Django code base itself and trying to appreciate it, but that's far-fetched. For now, you need to understand the language that was used to create Django, which is Python. So you need to understand Python or appreciate how to use Python. Then we will now listen to Django's instruction. Django will tell us that, oh, if you want to create this, do this. But then you are going to use Python. So Django is not a language. It's just a framework that is built with Python. It's going to give you instructions on how to achieve certain results. But in order to achieve that, you have to write a code in Python. So you need to understand Python and how to use it. I hope that answers your question. Okay, so a few things about Django that we need to know is that Django in itself, or anytime you are building an app, especially if it is a larger application and not just a very simple static page that you are creating, anytime you are building those apps, you have to determine how you are going to architect your application. See, it is a big application, so you have to plan it out. The same way when you're building a house, you don't just get up and go and put things together and say, I'm building a house. There has to be an architectural structure or plan, architectural plan for the app or house that you are building, right? So if you're going to be building a big application, you have to take the time to plan it out. How do I want to arrange these things? Where will I keep the database related files? Where will I keep these other files? Where will I keep those other files? What if there is something like this? Where will I keep it? You need to plan it all out. And most of these web frameworks they already have a structured architecture that you need to appreciate. And they are very popular architectures that we use when we are building web applications. One of the commonest that you would ever come across, which I learned about when I was doing PHP, is called the MVC architecture. Anyone to help me with the meaning of MVC? MVC, what does it mean? Guys, as I said, this is supposed to be a discussion. So please, okay, good. Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you so much. So Phyllis have put in the chat that M means model, V means view, and C means controller. Instead of going ahead to explain this, I'll tell you about that of Django. Then we use Django's own. It's very funny how my tablet is this direction, but then the computer is this direction. So I'm struggling to write on it. Okay. So Django uses a different architecture known as the MVT architecture. So for this, all that you need to know is that various web frameworks use various architecture. The very common architecture that you come across in almost every language that people use is the MVC. But Django uses an alternative one called MVT. M, we've already found out that stands for model. V, we found out that stands for view. C stands for controller. So what does T stand for in Django? Guesses or anyone who knows? Yes, thank you. There's templates. Templates. So let me try and explain this to you in a way that everyone will appreciate. We've already started. Don't slack. Don't think that this is not necessary. It's very important for you to appreciate this. Yes, it's templates. Okay. All right. So what we have here is the people who built Django, before creating, have to sit down and plan it out and say, okay, how are we going to, we know that we are going to be building a big thing. It has all of these files, but how are we going to organize our files? Can we do it such that all the files that contain things relating to database and the structure of the database will be put into one folder? So that happens to be the model. The model happens to be that folder where files that are relating to the database or files that enable you to interact directly with the database are put into the model. So remember, if I talk about using the MVT architecture or using the MVC architecture, all that it means is that you are going to have in your application, you're going to have these three folders. So there's going to be a folder called model. There's going to be, so I want to refrain from using a folder because sometimes depending on the application, it could be a folder or a file. All right. So please understand, if I'm saying folder, remember that it could also be a file. But what I'm saying is that the folder or file that is called a model is the one that will contain information about interacting with the database or connecting with the database or the database structure. Okay, so you can easily picture the model to be associated with databases. Simple like that. The model is associated with databases. And this happens in almost every architecture where you have the M in there. So whether you are doing MVT or MVC, the model refers or is pointing to the database. Hope that makes sense. Then, if you take, it's a bit tricky. Please don't get confused. Maybe I should talk about MVC before we come to MVT. And yes, I don't want us to be narrow-minded. That's why I wouldn't stick to just that of Django for now. This is still models, is associated with database, right? When we talk about the view, technically view, as the name suggests or implies, view is what others can see. And if you have learned anything about programming so far, especially if you've done any sort of, say, how you're building a website, how websites work, how the internet work, and all of that, you would have already come to learn about the browser side and the server side, right? And the front end and back end. The front end is what the end user sees. The back end is what is happening on the server that the user does not see. The view is represented by what the user sees. That's why we call it view. That is a common notion. Please don't get confused. The common notion about views is that it is what people see. That's why we call it views. So this is associated mostly with the front end, or generally the outputs that people will see. So if you don't want to call it front end, that is outputs that people will see. The controller, on the other hand, it's more of the logic. So mostly the controller happens to be like the server side, the logic that is going on. If a user is trying to log in, how do you know that this is the right user? You have to check some things. So that's where the logic is coming in. Check that this user with the username and password, is it correct? So you go and interact with your, okay, so remember that this is where the logic is. Okay, some people prefer to call it business logic. They call the view, the presentation. How do you say this? Business logic, presentation layer. Yes, so business layer, presentation layer, and the database layer. I remember even in class, we're discussing something, they were talking about MVC model. It was very funny. We're looking at how to solve problems. Like when you're building digital solutions, how to solve problems. And we're talking about, the professor started talking about MVC. I was like, no way. And he asked the class, what is MVC? Nobody knew. I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah. Anyway, that's just by the way. So we term the model as the database layer, the view as the presentation layer, and the controller as the business layer. That's where the logic is happening. Okay. But none of these work on their own alone. They interact with each other. That's what you want to understand. Every one of these interact with each other because the user has come to your site. This is your browser, and you are searching for something. Right. That is what they see. So they are on the view right now, but they search something and click the button. So say this is Google's interface. Click the search button. This view would have to reach out to the controller, right? Because the controller is where the logic is going to go on. So this person, the user is searching for something, and therefore the view reaches out to the controller and says, this is the command that the user has given me, do what you got to do. So this controller will now do, okay, you need to search. So it will check, did this person write something that makes sense? What exactly are they looking for? Are they authenticated? This person, is it the right person? Have they signed in or not? All of that. The controller would run those logic, and maybe the controller needs to find information from the database. So this controller will now interact with our model. This is our model, which is more of the abstraction from the database, right? So now this is the part that interacts directly with your database, It has the structure for the database and everything is in here. So the controller talks to this. This one is in sync with the database. So it will get you everything that you are asking for, but the logic takes place here. The controller decides what they request for. So I want information from the database. What kind of information? I want this kind of information. All will be detailed in the logic part. Then we throw that request to the model. The model knows exactly what information this controller wants. So it goes to the database to gather that information and now sends it back to the controller. The controller would package or repackage this data that it has received in any way or form that you want to end up presenting it to the user. And now you send it to the view, and the view will display it nicely to the end user. Do we understand MVC? If you have a question, please go ahead, raise your hand, ask the question, or now if anyone has a question, you can unmute and ask your question. Anyone with a question? Yes. I take my time. I know I can speed up, but I take my time so that everybody will understand. Yes. Hi, Ronald. Next thing. Do you have a question? Yeah, Felix, please go ahead.
No question.
Adewale, I salute.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. Yeah, I just want you to go over the explanation using, let's say, a simple form page, where
Okay.
the user wants to fill in a registration template, how
Okay.
do you think work, like performing this, what's it called? Post request, regular post request on the web page.
Okay.
So
Sure.
how do dynamics work,
Okay.
covering the OMPC? Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's say you are building a simple application that just allow people to sign up for something. Well, it could be anything, right? You are going to write some code that shows the interface where they have the form they are going to fill. And that code where the JavaScript, HTML, and CSS part to show the form will form part of the views. So the folder that you have called views, or the file for views, is where you are going to have all those HTML and CSS there. Please remember, this is when we are talking about the MVC architecture. It's different from how Django works. I'm going to blow your mind when we go to Django, but I need you to understand this, because if you learn the Django one, it is not a standard one. So you may end up being confused if you start reading around other things. That's why I wanted you to understand the very popular one, which is the MVC. So now if you appreciate the MVC, then we can make the twist for the Django one, right? So you have the views directory, which is where you're going to write your HTML, CSS, JavaScript to show the form. If somebody clicks on submit, you are going to make a request, right, to send some data to the database to store the person's information. But then this request that you are making will not go straight to the database. It will go to the controller. Within the controller, you would implement several logic. You want to check, did the person fill out all the forms, the entries in the forms? Are the data provided accurate? Is the date provided accurate? Did they enter something wrong? This person, does the person has the right authority to access what they are trying to access? All of those logic, you are going to check them in the controller. So this is the controller. So the controller mostly is part of the back end. That's why we usually say back end developers do more with logic. The views parts are mostly done by the front end guys. Then we move to the back end where the controller logic is taking place. Sometimes even the logic here is just to clean up the data that is coming, make sure that you are going to clean it up so that you are not being, you are not going to break your database from SQL injection and all of that. Clean the data up. Maybe you want to clean it up from HTML entities or from trim it empty spaces, something like that. Like you're going to do all of those things in the logic. Then this controller knows that after I've done the logic, I've run all the logic. If everything is right, I need to save this data in the database. But the structure of the database is through the model. It is the model that knows the structure of the database. So the controller has to interact with the model to now present it the way that the model expects the data. Then the model will finally output the data to the database. And once the model is done, if it was successful, it will send back information to the controller to let the controller know that, oh yeah, the transaction was successful. Then the controller, the backend developer who is writing the code, will decide what message to send back to the view. So you can send a response to the view saying that, yes, the user was successfully registered. The front-end developer will now pick the data that is received from the controller and present it in a nice way, maybe a pop-up notification, a modal, like any way that they want. They would flash that to the user on the view side. So this is how the MVC model interacts in our application. Anything that talks about the structure of the database will be captured in models. Then the logic will be captured in the controller directory or file. And the presentation, what the user sees, will be captured in the views. I hope that makes sense. And we move on to Django now. Yes, yes. Okay, makes sense. Great. The session being recorded, yeah, is being streamed to YouTube. So hopefully you get it when you visit the channel. All right, let's go on. Next page. So there's going to be a bit of a twist here in Django. What I've talked about so far, the MVC model is the common model that you find in almost every other web framework. But in Django, it's a bit different. And the naming in Django can be misleading sometimes. So please pay attention. The model in Django is the same models that we know about. That's the parts that interact with the database, right? The view in Django, it's so different. It's very funny. The views in Django is not the views you know. The views In fact, templates in Django is what represents the views from other from the MVC model. Let me take my time and explain this. When you say template in Django, it is the part where you're going to have your HTML, CSS, JavaScript. That is where the template is coming in. So this is technically the presentation layer for Django. Please pay attention. Presentation layer for Django is the template. The view is the logic or the business layer. Then this is the data layer or database layer for the model. So if I ask you to match the MVC model to the MVT model, automatically M will match to M. What will view V here? What will it match to in here? Anyone to help? What do you think it represents?
V will match to T.
V will match to C, exactly. So since here in Django, the V is rather the logic, and we know that in MVC, it is the C that is the logic. It means here the V matches to C rather, and the T will match to V. That is where it becomes a bit confusing, but all I need you to remember for Django, because now we are learning Django, is that when you see models, inside models, what are we going to be doing? We are going to write things that gives us the structure of our database. Just remember that. Forget every other thing. I try to explain it. If you didn't understand it, forget every other thing. And remember, in Django, everywhere we have models, whether it is a file or a directory, the model is where we are going to write the structure of our database, how we want our database to look like, or what and what to be in our database. That's a model. If I talk about the view, that is where the logic for your application is going to go to. So if somebody is trying to access this particular link or resource, what should you do? All the logic will be done in here. And finally, for you to show something to the user, especially if you are using Django in itself as a full stack framework, then the presentation, anything you are going to show to the end user would be captured in the templates. So if you create templates, that's where you're going to write your HTML, CSS, and all of that. I hope that makes sense. Up to this level, is anyone confused? We are all good. I hope so. Okay. So now that you know the structure, we're going to, let me bring out VS Code. We're going to do a few things. The thing about building applications, especially, let's pull up a new one, sorry. Okay. So the thing about building applications, I was going to say something. Yeah. The thing about building applications that depend, remember that we said for Django, they've built it, or any framework at all that you're going to use, it has been built on top of like a lot of code base, right? And some of these code base that have been built for you, in fact, they depend on other libraries and packages. Even if you were building your own application from scratch, there are some packages you are going to use. There are some libraries that you are going to use, models that you are going to be importing from, and all of that, right? So in the same way, building that structure for you, that foundation for you, the web framework for you, the creators of the framework also built using some of these libraries, packages, and all of those extra resources, right? And for that matter, we call these dependencies. These are things that this framework that you are using depends on, or your application that you are going to build depends on. And these dependencies, as you might have learned by now, they have different versions because they keep being improved. Even Django itself has versions. Python itself has versions. So when you are going to start building an application like this, the very first thing you want to do is one, Django is written in Python. Therefore, you need Python installed on your system to be able to write code in Django. So you can't write Django or build a Django application without having Python. I hope that makes sense. Python is a language. Django is just a product that has been built with Python. And you know by now, if you've learned Python before, is you can't run a Python program without having installed Python. So that's the very first thing you want to do. And since from the beginning, I asked if everybody knew about Python and everybody seems to know, I can make the assumption that every one of us has Python installed. So I'm not going to go there. But if you don't have it, just it's a click away. Go to Google, how do I install Python, or download Python and install it. You'll be able to do that. So now let's assume you've all created or installed Python. We are on our way to installing Django and learning about exactly what we need. And I've mentioned to you that the application we're going to build will have different dependencies. And today we are going to build, if we build one application, we are using the specific version that either we choose or the latest one. But next 2 weeks, it could be that they are going to release another version of Python or another version of Django or any of the libraries or packages that Django relies on. So this means that the versions of the packages that we are going to use today will not remain constant. We may end up updating. Say, for instance, today we use Python 3.6 in building our application. And then next tomorrow, we are using, say, Python 4 has come and they say, oh no, we can no longer use Python 3.6. We need to upgrade to Python 4. I'm going to upgrade my system to Python 4. But then my application that I built previously depends on Python 3.6. And that is going to be a problem. So most of the time when you are working on big applications like this, it is always best to create an isolated area and put everything inside it. So don't use the whole setup that you have on your computer. You create what we call a virtual environment for your code base. So all the dependencies will be installed separately within that virtual environment. Then now, when you go ahead to update your system's Python setup, it doesn't affect that virtual environment because it is secluded from the main system. It is a private environment, if I can say that. I hope that makes sense. So that is one common practice you want to adopt, that anytime you're building, especially if it's going to build it, going to be a big application or an application that has quite a number of dependencies, make sure that you have a virtual environment installed. And there are a couple of ways that we can install virtual environments in Python. So let's start creating, let's create a folder. Let me see, personal learning programming. Let me create one here and call this code with Ehoneah. Then let's go in there and create one folder, call it Django lesson 1. Okay. And I want to open this folder in VS Code. Great. So now this is just a folder that I've created, but within this folder, I should be able to create a virtual environment within which I'm going to install Django and all its dependencies. So anytime I want to use it, I am going to have that secluded area, that private area, such that all the dependencies would be within that one. If I go ahead and update my system, the global setup in terms of Python version or any other package version. It doesn't affect my application because every installation in this particular project that we're going to create will be included in that virtual environment. Okay, so let's bring up a terminal. Terminal, where are you? Okay. Bring up a terminal and let's see. To create a virtual environment, we can use pip to do that. And once you have knowledge of Python, I want to presume that you also know about pip. So we can do pip install VENV. That is one package for creating virtual environments in Python. So we can go ahead and install this. Oh, I should have given it a name. Oh my. Pip. Oh goodness. EMV. Then let's call it EMV. Okay. Hey. No pass. What's that? Pip install. We could not find version that satisfies the requirements. Oh my goodness. Did I just forget something? Python exe install. Let me upgrade it. Wow. Today, these people do not want to agree for me. Okay. Let me confirm something by bringing up my. So I think the first time I tried learning Django, I wrote a short blog post on it. Yep. This was October 2022. Wow. So here I use virtual ENV, but then we could, so this is one of the packages and the VMV is also one of the packages. I don't know why VMV is VEMV. Pip install VEMV. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay. So when you are installing virtual environments like virtual EMV, that's when you use pip install. But this is just, yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay, so let's get back. Let me show you what is happening. So VEMV is now a model that Python comes with. So we just have to call Python and say that it's a model that comes with Python, right? So we are using this model and you pass the name of your virtual environment to it. And commonly you may choose to call it EMV or even decide to call it VEMV to show that it's the virtual environment. But it confuses people not knowing why this is VMV, VEMV. So let me explain this. Python is just telling us that we are using the Python interpreter to run this, but then the flag -m tells us that this is a model, right? We're calling a Python model, and the model is called VMV. So by default, Python comes with this model, VMV. Then this is the name of our environment. So hopefully this should work. Great. So you can see that it has created something here and it has added all of these. This is just the virtual environment that has been created. So what it means is that now within my folder, I've created an environment that enables me to hide everything that I'm doing from the global system. Okay. All right. So I can see that Humphrey Steven was making a suggestion. All right. Thank you very much. Some of these things, they're more, anyways, fine. Yeah. So as I was saying, we have created the environment. Please pay attention. Maybe I should be listing the steps here. The first thing we did, I mean, you want to open your code editor, right? And find the directory in which you want to be working from. After that, create the virtual environment. After creating the virtual environment, the next thing you want to do is to activate this virtual environment so that every other thing that you do is actually within that virtual environment. If you create it and you are yet to activate it, it doesn't work. You did not get, why do we need to install virtual environment? Okay. So this is what I'm saying. On my computer right now, I have certain, let's use just Python, a specific version of Python, right? Python 3 point something something, okay? On my computer, globally, on my computer. This project that I'm coming to work on will take up the latest version of Python at the time of doing this session, which is the current one. So let's assume that 2 weeks from now, Python upgrades to Python 4. It's unlikely, but let's just make the assumption. For me to keep up with new developments, I'm going to update my computer to Python 4, right? But then the application that I built 2 weeks ago still runs on Python 3 point something. What if it's such that Python 4 is not backward compatible? That means Python 4, if they tend to happen such that it is no longer able to run Python 2 code, a lot of things have changed and therefore it cannot run Python 3 code. That means my computer will now not be able to run the code I wrote 2 weeks ago. So I want to always make sure that I create a unique environment and put all the packages, the dependencies that my application depend on, install them within that virtual environment. So that now, even if my computer itself, the outside one, the global one, upgrades to Python 4, the one that I'm using to run my Django application is not affected. So this is applicable to almost any program you are working with. Remember, updates keeps happening every single day. Like people are trying to improve these packages almost every day. And you will never know when you will reach a point where the package is no longer backward compatible. So we can't guarantee that the packages you are using today will be supported by what will come in a year or two from now. But we want to make sure that our computer is still able to run this irrespective of what extra updates that are made. So we are creating that virtual environment, the secluded area, to keep all the things within it. It's like, okay, this is my room. There is light here, and I'm doing something that requires light. But there is an intensity of light that is required. Except that this room light intensity can change anytime, any day. So if I want to be able to control, let's say I'm doing an experiment, I want to be able to control the exact amount of light that I'm exposing to my experiment, I'll go and bring a box and put that specific light with a specific intensity within the box and cover it. So that even if the intensity of the bulb in my room changes, it doesn't affect my experiment forever and ever until I go in and open that box and now change what is within the box itself. So that is a virtual environment. And that's the essence of creating virtual environment. So anytime you're going to create a project that has, in fact, if it has more than 2 dependencies, you should use a virtual environment. Very important. So now we are just learning how to create the virtual environment. And I said that the virtual environment now using VMV. So I'll leave the link. Let me grab that link. The link to the blog post I wrote. There is the alternative of using virtual ENV, and that you would have to install to be able to use it. So I'm dropping the link in the chat. Those of you who are interested can explore that later. But now, personally, I prefer to use the VMV model. So VMV is a model available in Python. Therefore, when you want to create it, you just use Python, then -m VMV. That is, you are calling this model, but what is the name of the directory that you want? You can call it anything. You can call it my virtual environment, whatever you want. Then hit enter. That creates it for you. That has created the environment, but it has not activated it yet. It means that virtual environment is not taking over. If you go ahead and do any other installation right now, it would be outside the virtual environment. So the next thing you want to do after creating a virtual environment is always to activate that environment, activate the virtual environment. That's your next step. So how do we activate it? This comes with scripts that we can use to activate or deactivate. So I called my virtual environment env. When you open it, look out for this directory called scripts. Within that directory, you can see that we have activate here and we have deactivate. So all I need if I want to activate this is to run this script, the bat script here, or just call it activate. So how am I going to be able to do that? We can go ahead and say I'm in where I am right now. I want to go to env. Then in env, I'm going to scripts, right? Yeah, so please pay attention. It depends on whether you are in Windows or you are on Mac or Linux. They're a bit different, but I mean, pay attention. How did I find out? I open script to look at what is available. Then I use that, right? So now all I'm trying to do is to go and open this file, activate.bat. So in my current directory, I am looking for, I was using the /, but in Windows, they use the /. Okay, except that VS Code will automatically correct it when I use the tab to autocomplete it. So this is what is happening. Even though I wrote the /, as soon as I use the tab key to autocorrect it, or autocomplete, I meant, it changed it to the backward one. But if you're on a Linux machine or a Mac machine, you are going to be using the /. Then it's within script. Within script, we have activate. So this is what I need to run. As soon as I run this, sorry, I need to pay attention. So I have run, initially I ran this, which is to activate it. Then I ran deactivate. Once it is active, this is what happens. I don't know if you can see it. I hope so. I wish I could. Is it preference? It's been a while since I did this. To be able to zoom the west, control plus. Okay, cool. No, control B. Oh no, control. Today, these things want to stand against me today. Okay, so hopefully you can see by now. Before I activated this, what you had here was PSC column, blah, 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 as you can see. That was before I activated it. As soon as I activated it, it changed to the name of my environment. This tells me that initially it was using my whole system, everything that was installed on my system. But as soon as I activated, it changed to this specific environment that I have created. So that is what happens when you activate it. All right, sorry, hold on for me. Sorry, guys. Someone was calling me. Let me refill my water. But if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask your question. Anyone with a question, just go ahead and ask the question. Yes. Any questions? All right. Okay. So I guess there is no question. So let's go on. Oh, oh, Windows in Mac. I'm just trying to read what are you using Windows on Mac? Yeah, I'm using Windows here. Yes. But since I switched to this setup, I've not installed Linux yet. Yeah, and the reason why I'm feeling lazy to install Linux is that I'm using Git Bash here. So I can use Git Bash, I can use WSL if I want to use Linux. So I have all of these terminals available to me if I want to. Sometimes when one specific example I found that requires that I go to Git Bash or WSL is if I want to, what's the word? Ooh, make a script executable. If I want to make a script executable, man, doing it, Windows does not allow you to do that. So I need a Linux environment to be able to do that. So I use Git Bash or WSL for those purposes. Okay. See if you have Git Bash. Okay. All right. No question. Let's go on. Great, great, great. So I hope we are getting the gist of it. As soon as I activated this, we now had the environment showing here. As soon as I deactivated it, then we had it here. File permissions. I know, right? On Windows. I don't even think, I don't know, do they even exist? Apart from using the Git Bash and the WSL and code, do they really exist? Or you have to go into those how is that thing called? Machine key, whatever, whatever, to be able to do it. Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, makes sense. Anyway, so to activate it, as I've said, you should always remember where the file is. We have created a virtual environment called env. So I want to first go into this directory, right? Go. I could use CD to go in there and go into script, but it doesn't make sense. So now that I'm here, from the present directory, go to env. Then from there, I want to go to script. Then I want activate. If I click enter, it's going to run this. If you are in a Linux environment or um, a Mac environment, I think you'd have to start this with the word source. I guess. I think you'd have to start something like this. Or is it Windows that you're supposed to? Anyway, you try. If it doesn't work this way in a Linux environment, bring source before it. Then click enter. As soon as I click enter, now the environment has been activated. So you see that I have this environment activated. So every other thing I go on to do will be done within my activated virtual environment. And that is what you want to be able to achieve. All right. Then now we have created our virtual environment. So we can go ahead and create or install Django. Install Django. Remember that Django is a web framework. It's a code base that people have written using Python that gives you a structure to build on top of. So if we install Django, essentially we are going to add more code base. It's going to automatically bring that code base that other people have written and have it in our code, right? So we're going to install Django. How do we install Django? we can install it with pip. So we can do pip install Django. By doing this, we are going to install the latest version of Django. Let me go to this and show you something. Yeah, so I think this time when I was writing this, I was using a Linux environment. So you see that here, I had to activate it with source, then the link to or the path to the activate file. And this is what shows when you have activated it, exactly as I was showing. If you want to deactivate an activated environment, then you just write the word deactivate. Okay, so to install Django, pip install Django, that is to install the latest version of Django. If you want a specific version of Django, I found this Stack Overflow link. This is 2 years ago, but I think I was trying to understand how you do it. I don't remember right now, but you can click on this to go there to check. Okay, so let's go back. Now, is it? Okay, so Django has been installed, right? But interestingly, we don't really see anything happening. My goodness. Django has been installed, but we are not seeing anything that is happening. Why is that so? Why is that so? Let me do, let's try pip list and see if it will show us. So pip list is to show us all the packages that we've installed, right? And as you can see now, Django 5.01 has been installed here. Django 5.01 has been installed here, but then we don't see anything. What does this mean? Now, all that it means is that Django has been installed, but then we haven't created a Django project yet. This is not the same for every application. So you have to understand when you are installing Django, this is the steps you go through. Then you know, okay, this is how this thing works for Django. Maybe if you are doing something else, because if you are working with, say, Express.js, it will be a different thing. Okay, you would have seen by the time you install, anyway, let me not go there right now. So Django has been installed, but the good thing is that now in this particular directory we are within this environment that we can create multiple Django projects. But that means that it's going to use this same version of Django. So if Django version changes or we want a specific version, we can't come into this environment to use this one. The reason why we created a virtual environment and activated it was to make sure that we are only using the specific version. And this currently is the specific version of Django we are using. So we can go ahead and start a Django project, right? To start a Django project, let me clear this place. So there is a utility called Django admin that once we install Django, we have access to it. Django admin. So once we install Django, we have access to this utility, that's tool or the command Django admin. And it says type Django admin help and the sub command for help on a specific one. But I wanted to show you what is available. So these are the available sub commands. One of them here, for instance, let's see, this run server. So will help us run a server. But let's look for start project. So if you want to know the various commands that you can run, these are the various commands that you can run. Okay. So to start a project, we have to use that utility and say Django admin start project and now provide a name for the project. Does that make sense? Once we have installed Django, we have access to this tool, Django admin. And this tool is that utility that enables us to create various things or do various things with Django. So to be able to create a project in Django, a Django project that will bring all the code base that somebody else has written for us to build on top of, we need to use the start project. So this is how we go about it. We say Django -admin, then start projects. Start project. But we need to give our project a name. So what is the name of our project? What are you going to build? Give it a name. Any name? Suggestions? I don't even know what name to use. Yes. Say your news blog. Let's call the project news blog. So we go on, and now it has created news blog. It has created news blog, and as you can see, one thing that I learned recently is the fact that this sort of redundancy that is in here, it created news blog, but within news blog, it also created another directory called news blog. And that seemed a bit redundant. And when you are using this to explain some of the code base, it becomes a bit tricky for absolute beginners. So I found a trick. Let's delete this. By deleting this, it means we no longer have the project, right? Now there is no Django project. We are back to square zero. So let's start again. But instead of just passing news blog, you add the dots that shows that, oh, you should do it in this current directory, the news blog directory. So if we run this, now we have only news blog directory, just one directory and not two. I hope you guys got it. It's very tricky. Like when I started learning it, I didn't know this. And sometimes I was wondering why I said start project, I called it news blog. You've now created that and you've created another directory, and it makes it difficult sometimes. So this is a trick. Use news blog, whatever the name of your project, you pass that here, then the dot to show that everything in that directory. So news blog. Okay. Now we have our news blog project, but aside the news blog project, we can also see manage.py. So the question is, what is this manage.py doing? Let me go and add on to the things that we are doing. We've installed Django and we start a Django project. So that's the next step. Start a Django project. Then after we've started a Django project, now we have, this is our project, right? There are things in our projects. We'll look at them soon. But what is this manage.py? The interesting thing is that earlier on, I showed you something about Django admin. And I told you that it's a utility that enables you to do things. And these are the various commands that you can run with the help of Django admin. The problem with Django admin is that Django admin does not have the context of your project. So if you do anything at all that is outside the context of your project, then Django admin will not be able to handle that. Or if you are trying to run any of these and it requires the context of your project, Django admin will not be able to handle that. So to solve that problem, a wrapper has been created around Django admin and now called manage.py. Manage.py. And let's see, those of you who may be interested in what is actually here. At least by now you understand Python code. So you should be able to somehow interpret what is going on here. We've gone in to import the OS model. We've imported sys. Then we have created a function called main. And in this function, what are we doing? We are setting an environment variable called Django settings model and assigning this to it. Then we are trying to run Django.call.management import execute from command line. So we are importing this particular function that is used to from the name, you can infer that it is used to execute things that will be run from the command line. Okay. And if that didn't work, you should run this exception or error. But if it worked, go ahead and execute sys.argv. So those of you who did C programming already, this would be easy to understand for you, 6.argv. But if you don't know about it, this is the commands that we are going to enter on the command line. We are just passing that command to this function for it to execute. So that is exactly what this manage.py does. All that it does is that grab everything that the user is going to put on the command line and use this function to execute it. And this function is going to use the Django admin utility to run the code or the command that you provide. So there are a couple of things, like all of these things are there. The very first one I want us to do is, now we've created our Django project. So can we see this Django project in our browser? Remember, I told you that a web framework is somebody has built the background, the foundation for you. So we just need to proceed with it. And fortunately for us, Django, when you install or you start a Django project, is at the point where you can see it even in the browser. So to see it, the first thing we need to do is to set up the server. Make sure the server is running. How do we set up the server? We need to run server with this command, okay? But instead of using the Django admin utility tool, we can use the manage.py. This is a Python file. So if you want to run it, then obviously, what is happening now? If you want to run it, then obviously you have to call Python to say that this is a Python file, or I want to use Python to run this file. And the file is called manage.py. And what command are you passing to it? So that is the argv that we're referring to over here. Those are the command line arguments. So the argument we are providing to this file is what is going to pass to that Django admin. And so we can go ahead and use run server. If we run this, it's going to start a local development server that our project will be running on. So let's hit enter and let me document that. So we started a new project and we start the server. Or do I say start the server or run the server? Whichever one you want. Okay. Maybe start a new project. We did that with the help of Django. Oh, Django admin. Then for run server, we did that with the help of manage.py. Okay. So now it's telling us that the server, starting development server at this URL. By default, it's using the port number, port 8000. If you are doing multiple projects and port 8000 is already used, then you will not be able to use the default port. So you may have to change the port number. But let's just click on this to go to view our site. You could have just copied it as well to open it in a browser. But let's see which browser. Oh, finally. So the install worked successfully. Congratulations. We have created our first Django project, and this is what it looks like. So they've built all of these things for us. We didn't have to create anything. In fact, the one good thing about Django that you will all come to love is the fact that by default, Django has an admin dashboard that is easy to configure. As soon as you create one, two, they integrate it into your dashboard for you. So if you're building an application for a client, say you are building even an e-commerce platform for a client, all you are going to concern yourself with is building the app itself or the application itself, and not the back end for the user to start inputting their data. Django is going to handle all of that for you. And that is what makes it very nice. because building the back end or the dashboard is one of the biggest headache for developers. Where you're building almost any platform, you usually want to build the customer facing one first. Then after you are done with that. That's when you now take time to build the back end or the dashboard behind it. So it happens such that Django has that figured out for us. And that's one of the things that I think I personally love about Django. And I believe that when we get into those details, you would also love it. So if for nothing at all, we have started from what Django is to the point where we have installed a Django project. And I hope that every one of us would be able to create a Django project. If we are to recap, to create a Django project, we advise you can do it without going the step, doing the virtual environment, right? It's highly advised that create a virtual environment and play with it, because in almost every programming language, you are going to be using this, right? So it's good to know these concepts. Create a virtual environment, then activate the environment. Afterwards, install Django, then start a Django project. Once you have started it, you can start the server by running this. Any questions so far? Yes, yes. Yes, Felix, please go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm going to comment on Steven's comment. Yes, Felix, go ahead.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for the session so far.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
on the virtual environments, yeah, I get why we have to use it. So my concern is our application files. Let's say this news
Yeah.
project we just created now. So
Mm.
say we start building, scaling it up, like creating more views, more pages and all that. Where are those files saved? Will they still be saved? Because I noticed even while creating the virtual environment, we are still maintaining the original file part.
Yeah.
No, before the one and it has been like that before you even created the virtual environment. So
Yeah.
which is indicating that it's still being saved on your like the exposed local hard disk sort of. So how is it making it valid? Is the virtual environment only holding the package file, I mean the modules, or is as well holding the local files, that's your project files?
Okay. So I think to answer the question, you just have to go back and appreciate the reason why we have the virtual environment, and that is to maintain the specific dependencies that we are using, right? The versions of those ones that we are using. So it's not necessarily these files that you are creating, but the installations of dependencies and their versions. So what version of Django did you install? When I did pip list, you saw what came up. So let's go. Maybe I should stop it here. Use Control C to stop it. Then when I did pip list, this is the dependencies in here, right? Let
Okay.
me open another one. Here, I haven't activated any virtual environment. Oh, it's activated here. Sorry.
So
So
deactivate.
let me deactivate this. Then let's do pip list.
Oh,
And let's wait for it. So
oh,
you see,
okay.
on my
Yeah.
computer, I have all of these installed.
Wow.
But for this specific one,
Just
this
the
is the
six.
only thing that is installed here. So my applications have access to these specific ones. It still has access to every other one that my computer has if I wanted to use. But now we have secluded it by activating the virtual environment and say, hey, keep to your own environment. This is all that you need. So it doesn't need to. I think I get your question, because those times when I didn't understand the concept, I also thought as much. I expected that all these files should be within this directory, the env directory. That's what I thought, right? But don't see it from this directory. See it
Mm.
from where you are activating, whether it's
Yeah.
activated or not. As soon as you deactivate it, you are outside it.
Mm.
So if you want to work with just these ones, then you need to use that virtual environment that you have created for it. And there should be a way to even get all of these. I think it's, let me try, pip freeze, then say, let's create a requirement.txt.
TXT.
It's, yeah, great. So you see what it has done? It has pushed our requirements here, the dependencies here. So if I start a new project anywhere and I want the same dependencies that this environment is depending on, I'll just copy this requirement and I'll do pip install these ones. Okay, so that is one way to grab. When you are done with your project and you want to, it's always advisable. In fact, for if you're building in Node and Express.js, I think that's the very first thing we do. Anytime you install something, you have to, it will usually automatically add to your package.json, or you would have to go and add anything you need your system to depend on in the package.json. So for Django or in Python, you can also use the requirements.txt. And you can wait until you are done everything with everything before you freeze it and get the requirement file, upload it to your Git so that anytime you want, I mean GitHub I meant, anytime you want, you have access to it. Yeah. I
Oh,
hope
great.
your question is answered.
Yeah. So sorry, because you mentioned package
Yeah.
.json. So because I know I've interacted with it long time ago, maybe 2 years
Okay.
ago, so I can't really remember. But I didn't remember creating a virtual environment before installing those. But I remember installing some modules
Yeah.
from package.json.
Yeah.
So I don't know, do we have to create virtual environments when working with such on Node.js as well?
Yeah, it's recommended as well.
Oh,
It
okay.
is recommended as well. So anytime you're building these things and you don't want them to interact directly with what you have, like your own sort of installations, all of these things. So I can even install, see, there are things here, Wexzip, SQL Alchemy, Flask, all of these things are globally installed. See the pip version that is here. These are globally installed on my computer. But maybe for this particular one that I'm working on, I don't want these ones. I know if you're in ALS, there are times that you've been instructed to use a specific version of a package, right? A specific version of a package that if you try using the latest one, it doesn't work. I remember even when we started out, there were some projects that if you did it with Ubuntu 22.04, it didn't work. You needed to go back and use 18 or something. I've forgotten exactly which one. So that's the end goal. The fact that personally I haven't also been using virtual environments when creating Node.js applications, but I think it's highly recommended, very highly recommended.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So I was going to respond to Steven. So I think in a case where you are building multiple apps, the redundancy might serve a purpose. Huh. Don't worry, we'll get into it. I don't think that would really be the case. And the concept of apps means something else in Django. So we have to be careful how we use it. But you can say, I want to believe that you're talking about projects when you are creating multiple projects. Yeah, I'm struggling to hear. Someone's, hi. Oh, it's not here. No, I can't hear you.
I'm trying to talk
Oh,
like
Steven.
explain
Okay, okay,
what
okay.
I
Yeah.
okay.
I'm
What I'm
yeah,
saying is I is an error because you can't go let's say the folder of the project, right? So I was mistaking the news blog to be the folder of the project.
Steven.
Can you hear me? I'm trying to talk.
Yeah, like I can hear you talking, but I can't hear exactly what you are saying. That's the problem.
Okay. What I'm saying is this. Like my comment was like
Yeah.
I thought news blog was the folder of the project. Then I realized that the folder of the project is different, which means the news blog is the default part of the project. It
Ah,
seems like my voice is not clear. So it's all right. Let me talk.
okay, 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 okay. Yeah, so
Okay,
I
let me
I
just
think
try
to
to
an
understand.
extent, no, Stephen, I think to an extent I agree with what you are saying, because now we have news block as a project, and this file here, the database file and the manage.py, the manage.py can be used for others, but the database file is specifically towards this. But if we do the same thing for a new project, then they are going to be crashing. So in that instance, if we are going to create multiple projects within the same directory, it will make sense to have that kind of redundancy. That will make sense. Yeah, I agree. But I think let's stick to this, because when you are moving around with the path, that's when it becomes confusing, because you now have news blog, and trying to explain that will be a bit confusing. So we'll stick to this structure, but I agree with what Steven said. Okay, let's go here. You use source on some certain terminals on Windows. Oh, okay. All right. That's good. Yeah, using the registry. I think that's what I was trying to recall for file permissions on Windows. Then, okay, you always have a way of making things simple. Eric, you're welcome. Can we use Docker to containerize a Django project? I believe so. I don't see why not. The interesting thing is that I am yet to really adopt Docker in any of my projects. I've just learned about it, used it for, I mean, doing the learning process, but I'm yet to learn about it. So maybe going forward, we'll look at how we are going to use these things. But yeah, the fact that you want to use a virtual environment for something and keep it separate, it makes sense to containerize it as well. And I think that would even probably be like the best way to approach it. So we can explore it later when we are done with our basic Django series. Okay, any other questions? So we haven't gotten into the Django content itself. All that we have done today is to know what Django is, what a web framework is, and also come to create a project, our first project with Django. So the assignment for you all is to go and create your first project with Django. The end product is to have something like this. If you get something like this, you are successful in the assignment. You can share it in the WhatsApp group. I want to believe that everyone of you is probably in the WhatsApp group, which I doubt, but then there is also the Telegram group. So, yeah, let me make this announcement officially. When I was a student in ALS, together with, I think I saw Adeole here. I hope he's still around. Adeole, are you still here? Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, so together with Adeole, we're running the iQuake community Telegram group. I haven't been very active there. In fact, I haven't been very active in any group anywhere. I have a lot of groups, but I haven't been very active in any of them. But going forward, I'm looking at continuing doing these streams where we learn together. See, the thing about doing some of these things on the fly if I was doing this thing on my own without being here showing you people, anywhere I felt that I don't remember this thing, I'll quickly just check. Like I won't test it to see. But when I am before you, I want to test it to see if there is a mistake. I learn from that mistake fast. Okay. So I'm happy to come show the mistakes that I make. And that also is good learning for you. Unfortunately for us, if I'm to create a YouTube video, I will cut those mistakes out. So you wouldn't be exposed to those mistakes. And you have the optimized version, the shorter one. And I think because of that, the sessions I put on YouTube are usually very long because I want to show all of these possible mistakes that we all make so that it is very realistic. You don't beat yourself when you start making those ones, but it is also the best way for every one of us to learn. So going forward, I'm looking forward to doing a lot of these, and I would hopefully announce when next we are having the stream. But if you are not in any of the groups, if you are in any of them, please do not bother getting into the other. So if you are in a WhatsApp group, you don't necessarily have to bother getting into the Telegram. Still thinking whether the problem I have with WhatsApp is that there is a maximum of 250. As soon as you exceed it, you have to create another, manage multiple groups. But for Telegram, at least it's just one group and we have everyone in there. So I'm not too sure, but whichever one you want to join, please feel free to join. Let me drop the links in the chats. For the Telegram, it's near Obed. And those of you in the Telegram group, this is when I apologize. I even need to, I should have discussed with Adewale before making this, but hey, Adewale, please forgive me. Nearobed.com/Telegram group. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. /Telegram group. So my full name.com/Telegram group. That means that going forward, it is not just ALS related things that we'll have in that Telegram group, but every other thing that we are learning. Then for the WhatsApp group, that is nearobed.com/SWM hyphen invites. Yep. Okay, so you can join any of those groups. Let me stop the live streaming at this point. Please, if you have any final questions, go ahead and ask it. Otherwise, I'm stopping the live stream and we'll have a conversation on when next and what time. Okay. Live stream, where are you?